And today we're going to build on that understanding. We'll review some of that content and think about what are our next steps for supporting students with comprehension needs. All right, if you don't remember who I am, I'm just going to very quickly reintroduce myself. My name is Dr. Allie Wilson. I'm a former middle school literacy and special educator. I'm now in my 8th year of teaching higher education, but I get to be in schools, at least virtually, all the time. And here are my little guys who have been right alongside me this last year. All right, here are some of our norms. I'm not going to go into depth with these. I'm sure they're very familiar to you as you've probably spent a lot of time on Zoom recently. Please do keep your camera on when you can. I'd love to see you. When you come back from a breakout group, I'm just going to go ahead and mute you. Number 3, trust the process. Last time we offered kind of a new way of thinking about comprehension assessment. If you have questions about that, please don't hesitate to ask. And if there's things that are kind of like butting up against what you know about comprehension, or how currently a lot of us across the nation are using MAP scores or standardized data as an identifier based on who needs comprehension instruction, who doesn't. So I'm going to ask you to stay with me and ask questions when you have them about this process. And finally, as we think about our students with unfinished learning, we want to take an equitable approach and make sure that we're always identifying them and their needs through a strength-based approach. So rather than saying the student can't, the student is still learning too. Any norms you want to add? Anything that doesn't feel right? Okay, awesome. All right, let's go ahead and get set up with our note catcher for today. I'm going to drop a link in the chat. And as you click on that link, it's going to ask you to make a copy. So your screen is going to look like this. Go ahead and click make a copy. And then you can either download it or add it to your Google Drive. And when you're done, just feel free to use the thumbs up icon or let me know you're done. We're a small group, so feel free to unmute and tell me as well. Thank you, Anna. Thanks, Reed. Thanks, Jessica. All right. Great, I think we're good to go. If you have any questions along the way or you can't access that, just let me know. Kirk and Molly, you doing okay? So Molly, what's happening when you're clicking on that link?
It says it won't come down. Hold on, I'm gonna try it one more time.
Okay. Is it working for you?
It's just right now I am.
Let me know if you can't get that. I can email it to you too. If you put your email in the chat, I can send you that note catcher
Okay.
via email.
Okay.
Easier. Okay. All right. So we'll have our note catcher in a minute, and Molly, I'll probably just take a minute when we go into breakout groups to send that to you, as long as you just send me your email in the chat. So as we engage today, you're familiar with these icons by now probably, but you'll see this if I'm about to send you into a breakout group, this chat, if I'm going to ask you to put something in the chat, and this if I'd love somebody to unmute and share. However, we're a small group and I'm just going to encourage you to share or contribute in whatever way you want. I might have suggestions there as visual cues, but totally up to you. If you want to unmute and share when it says chat, that's fine. All right, so let's talk a little bit about where we were last session to bring us to where we are right now. Last time, again, with my colleague Meredith, you thought about this concept of a narrative profile. And that's a shift in thinking. So what we asked you to do, or what we kind of offered, was a way of looking at 3 or 4 pieces of student work to think about how their comprehension is kind of ebbing and flowing throughout a unit. And so we can use those different artifacts to understand how well prepared are students to perform on the end of unit task. You all remember that? The narrative, okay, great. And so today we're going to think about what do we do with this data? All right. The other thing that Meredith supported you with was the framework we're using to think about older students' comprehension and unfinished learning. So she shared with you this RAND model of comprehension, which takes into account the text, how complex that text is, what activity the students are tasked with doing, and also the reader. So today we're going to zoom in and really think about the reader so that we can be responsive to students' strengths and needs. How many of you have seen this equation before or heard of the simple view? Okay, Diane, you have. Okay, so the simple view is an equation that helps us better understand the different component parts of reading. This was created by Guff and Tunmer in 1986. And basically, they help us understand that reading comprehension, the end-all be-all goal of reading, is actually comprised. Jessica, I'm glad we landed on something that feels familiar here. You'll love this then. The end-all be-all goal of reading, which is reading comprehension, reading a text and understanding it, is actually made up of two separate processes that we can separate. The first is decoding, lifting the words off the page, putting those letters together, knowing they stand for a word and reading them automatically and accurately. And then the second component is linguistic comprehension. I want you to think about linguistic comprehension as something that students can do with their eyes or something that students have if their eyes are closed. They don't need to read to do this. This is all the vocabulary they know, the knowledge they're bringing, their background, their experience, and how well they can hear something and make sense of it. That's their linguistic comprehension. So when we look at this equation, it's really helpful to think about these two things as being able to be separated, measured separately, and supported separately. They're also, oh man, Jessica, you might need to help me with this term. I always forget it. It's a multiplicative equation. So the more linguistic comprehension you have, the better a reader comprehension, thank you, better reader comprehender you will be, unless decoding is nothing. And vice versa. If you have really strong decoding skills, but you don't have a lot of experience, a lot of vocabulary, that's still going to allow you to be a stronger reader and comprehender. But we need both sides. So if decoding is a 0 or linguistic comprehension is a 0, we cannot read and comprehend. Does that equation make sense? All right, so I find this really helpful, especially when we're thinking about older students with unfinished learning, because we can actually tease them apart in service of supporting their reading comprehension. When we think about linguistic comprehension, the two components we're going to tap in today are vocabulary and knowledge, and what it looks like to analyze that and identify a need and then support it. And next time when we come together, we're going to be talking about these component parts of decoding, phonemic and phonological awareness, decoding, breaking that code, and then fluency, reading with automaticity and accuracy. So that's on one side of the equation, linguistic comprehension is on the other. And Molly, I don't have your email yet, so go ahead and put that in the chat. I may have missed it, so if you don't mind doing that one more time. And so again, we're going to focus today here on vocabulary and knowledge, and we'll turn our attention to decoding. But keep in mind, we need both of these parts, but for the purpose of our 90 minutes together, we've actually separated them. As we go through today's coursework, you might feel a tension. You might say, like, I can't support this because the student isn't yet reading the words on the page. But that's actually okay, because our students can critically think about a text even when they're still learning to read those words independently. So if we're supporting that LC side, activating their knowledge, building their vocabulary, it will support their ability to read and understand the text. Okay? All right, so that brings us to today's session as we look at vocabulary, knowledge, and engagement, the LC side, and then when we come back together in a month, we'll be thinking about this D side of the equation, looking at foundational skills and looking at fluency. And this is our essential question. I would love a volunteer to read it for us as I send Molly the note catcher. If I have a volunteer to do that.
I can do that.
Hey, Dan.
Our essential question, how do we provide knowledge and vocabulary support so that all students, particularly those with unfinished learning, can read and understand complex text?
Awesome, thank you so much. So that's where we're going today. Molly, that should be in your inbox. And to get there, we have 3 different objectives for the session. The first is to think about, what does it mean, differentiated instruction? We throw that term around a lot. We'll think about a normed definition of that today. The other part of this is to understand the relationship between knowledge, vocabulary, and comprehension. And finally, I'm going to share with you a couple of strategies that you can support your students with or your teachers with to activate and build knowledge and vocabulary. So that's where we're going. And we're going to start right here with this first one. So first, I want to hear from you. How do you define differentiated instruction? Take a moment, either put your thoughts in the chat or unmute and share. What does this term mean to you? And I'll let you know as soon as I see anything in the chat. I haven't seen anything come through yet. Thinking about that term, differentiated instruction. What is it? Thank you, Anna, for kicking us off. So as we wait for a few more to come through, I'll go ahead and share my definition. Yeah, access to material and meeting students' needs, being really, really responsive. Madison, are you in a place where you can read this definition out for us?
I am now.
Go for it.
Okay. Differentiated instruction is tailoring instruction to student needs so that everyone can have access to and be successful with grade level content.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ms. Ehlers. So we've got 2 components here, right? Supporting student needs, which all of you identified, and then that access. And I actually called on you, Madison, because that's what you were talking about, access to the content here. The other thing I want you to keep in mind is intervention is not putting somebody in that room, getting some great instruction, and then coming back and being ready to go and access the content. We're actually thinking about intervention as a continuum of supports. How in the core are we thinking about students' needs and tailoring our instruction in our core classroom? And how are we identifying that there might be additional needs outside of the core instruction that they need aligned supports to be able to kind of fill that gap? All right, but intervention is not a different room, a different place that students go to, but in fact, a way we are approaching supporting students across the board. So as we think about differentiated instruction, there's 3 major comprehension culprits that might be getting in the way. The first is motivation and engagement. A lot of us work with older students, so we know that's a big thing. It's a really big thing during COVID. Then we've got fluency, reading with accuracy and automaticity so that they can devote that cognitive energy to understanding the text. And finally, we have knowledge and vocabulary, and that's where we're going to focus today. So if a student can't or is unable to demonstrate comprehension in that particular lesson, it is likely that one of these 3 is the culprit. So how do we know which one? So let's think about these 3, starting with fluency. So if a student is not fluent, we might see that their accuracy is low, they have a slow, labored reading, or they're reading really, 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 really fast and they're not understanding. They might not be reading with strong expression or prosody, and their comprehension is impacted. That's our big indicator. We're not going to talk about fluency too much today because that's going to be saved for our next session, but keep in mind that that is indeed one of the culprits to comprehension. We've also got knowledge and vocabulary. If students are not able to demonstrate comprehension of the text fully, we might see inaccuracies or misunderstandings. They're not giving details, they're being very vague, or they have this literal level understanding, but nothing that supports an inference or critical thinking. And then we've got our big one, motivation. Motivation and engagement are hard to tease apart from knowing that there's a skill level need. So we kind of look to motivation last if we try other things and they don't work. Then we think, is this an issue of engagement? What else is happening here? So we might see that students are not engaging. We might see some affective components, that they want to use the bathroom when it's time to read, that they're acting out. This can look in many, many different ways. We're not going to talk a lot about motivation today, but I just wanted to plug some resources for you here. When we think about motivating reluctant readers, we can do a lot. We can do this for all students too. So the CAST Institute, which studies the Universal Design for Learning framework, recommends that we do these 3 things. The first is optimize choice. Give students a little bit of autonomy to choose how they want to engage. That's motivating for all students. The second is to make them feel like their ideas are valued, their ideas are relevant, and that you are here to support them. And the third is cultivating that rich classroom culture. None of these things are brand new ideas. You've heard of all of these before, but in your follow-up email today, I'm going to email you the link to the CAST Institute's strategies so that you can have additional kind of tools in your pocket to support motivation, because we're not spending a lot of time here today. All right. So as we plan to differentiate, I'm just going to chat the note catcher one more time, and as we have new participants join us. Thank you for your patience as we do this. Oops, my apologies. That is not the note catcher. Molly, your email is not the note catcher link. Let me try that one more time. There we go. All right. And now we have 2 Madisons and we have 2 Jessica Courts. So if you don't mind just switching your Zoom name so I know who you are, that would be fabulous. So as we think about planning to differentiate our support of folks, we have like a simple 3-part process. The first is to think about what is getting in the way of a student's comprehension. What is the culprit here? And the way we do that is we think about what is impacting their ability to identify the central idea of the text. The second is to think about, how am I going to mitigate this? What strategy am I going to use to address this need? And then what is this implementation going to look like in the classroom? And finally, we want to make sure we're assessing their progress. Did that strategy I used work? Did it not? How will I adjust my instruction? So as you think about these 3 steps, I almost want you to think about them as a circular model. You notice something, you try something out, you assess your progress, you adjust, and then you keep going through this cycle. One of the things we often forget, and I am very guilty of this, is step 3. I try something out and then I assume it works. Or I try something out, I don't collect data, and I hope it works, right? So we always have to make sure we come back to step 3 to assess the progress and adjust as needed. This is also part of our MTSS cycle, all right? We always come back to ensure that what we're trying is working and that students are not stuck in intervention with no exit ramp. All right, so we're going to start right here thinking about identifying those culprits. And I promise I'm not going to talk this whole time. I'm going to hand it over to all of you soon. All right, so this is the narrative profile. Just raise your hand if you remember this kind of visual. Yeah, and remembers. Jessica remembers. Okay. So let me just reintroduce you to Mr. Yardley. You're going to see him in this session and next, and you met him last time. So he is an ELA teacher, and he has a class of 30 students in one period. And I analyzed 3 different formative assessments, or he used 3 different artifacts as formative assessments to think about how his students were comprehending each of them. Comprehension for older students is not a number. It is not a 216 on the map or a below proficient on the NAEP. It's not like that, as I'm sure you all know, but it moves and it ebbs and it flows. And so as we look at these students, if we analyze a below grade level artifact, an on grade level artifact, and an above grade level artifact, or it could be the same level, it doesn't matter. We just chose 3 for the sake of choosing 3 for this particular case study. We know that students' comprehension will change. We know that when we're asking them to complete a particular task, they might do better on one task than they do on another one. So this gives us an overview of what that comprehension looks like as we're offering different kinds of activities. And that's going to be able to enable teachers to think about what that profile looks like and then scaffold instruction. Okay, so that was the narrative profile, and we're going to continue to think about this. So Mr. Yardley went through, he gave these artifacts, and then he analyzed his students' work, and he came up with different trends in their comprehension. It wasn't that they didn't get it or they did. There were actually nuances in what they understood. Some readers had strong comprehension, and they supported it with a connection to evidence. They got that central idea, and they used evidence to back up their thinking. Then he had some students who were kind of factual thinkers. So they used text evidence that was robust in the answer, but they didn't directly relate it to the claim they were making or the central idea. Then he had students who had some like literal understanding. They understood the central idea, but they didn't support it with text evidence. Then he's got these two other groups of students, those with limited or no demonstration of understanding. So the students in group 4 may have not used any text evidence at all, maybe used kind of random things that weren't connected to the text. And then you've got group 5. These students had some like illegible writing. They kind of had margins in the corners of their worksheet, and they just were not demonstrating any understanding, despite this being the 3rd or 4th text of the unit. All right, and we all know that we have students that kind of fit into all of these categories. So he analyzed this data. This is what he came up with after he looked at his narrative profile artifacts. And so we're going to focus on these last 4 groups of students, and we're going to think about their linguistic comprehension. How can we support the language knowledge side of this? Note that this equation is incomplete. We're not focusing on decoding, and there are very likely decoding barriers, at least for group 5. We're going to visit that when we come back during our final session. But for most of our older readers, they usually fall into bucket 1 to 4. There's only a couple of students usually who have major decoding or major fluency issues. All right. So to kind of remind you about what Mr. Yardley is doing with his students, he is teaching them a unit on the Syrian War. And so far he's had them read an article about the Syrian War. He's had them analyze a map. And today he's going to, actually tomorrow, he's planning his instruction with a poem called Where I Am, which it was written by an anonymous 19-year-old Syrian refugee. So Mr. Yardley knows that some of these students, based on their narrative profiles, are prepared to engage with this end of unit task, which asks students to write an essay about the impacts of the war on the people, the country, and their heritage. So some students are on their way to performing on this, but all those buckets of students are not. So he's got to think about, how do I use their data to prepare them to read and understand this text, which is super important and relates to my end of unit task, particularly what is the impact of the war on people. So what we're going to do is we're going to read about his thinking, how he is going to analyze this particular text, Where I Am From, and think about those trends he identified, those 5 different buckets, as well as any barriers in the text he thinks that students might encounter. All right, let me show you what you're about to do. You can close your eyes if you get seasick. I'm just going to scroll up here. All right. So this is what I just narrated, these 5 different groups of students. You don't need to read that. So you're going to go right to page 3. And I want you to read his annotated version of the text. This is how he prepared for his next day's lesson. And I want you to think about his annotations. What kind of things is he annotating? How is he using the data he identified previously in his annotations? If this poem is hard for you to read, by the way, there's another version of it down here, okay, for your reference. So take 3 or 4 minutes and think about those focus questions. And we'll come back together then. Can you show me on your fingers how much time you need to read his annotations and think about those two questions? All right, another minute or two. Great. Is anyone else having an issue with a note catcher? Okay. Madison, do you want to put your email in there? I'm not sure why. It might be a Google Doc site that's blocked. Sometimes that happens at the district level. Sure, Molly. And I'll just continue to share my screen. I'm sorry that the text is so tiny. There you go. So we'll take another minute or so. Let me know if you got that, Madison. I sent it to .com. All right. So let's come back together here and kind of think about his annotations. So how did his annotations show that he is planning with the trends in mind? I'm just going to make this smaller so you can see it a little bigger on your end. And then what barriers does he identify might impact comprehension in this text? Feel free to unmute and share here. What did you surface?
So Allie, so being from a math background, we always look at where we need to go before we get there. So I'm assuming he's doing the same exact thing, that the very first thing it looks like he wrote was the big idea. To keep that in mind so that as he was reading and annotating, he could continue to go back to that central focus.
Yeah, thank you, Jessica. And I think as an ELA person, I often get lost because in a text, so much is rich and I might deviate from my path, right? And so I really like that transferability from math to how this is looking in ELA. We're going here. Everything that we should do and everything that I want to annotate is based on this big idea. Yeah, thank you. I'd never thought about it that way, but it's sometimes much more direct in math.
We're very literal thinkers. It's very linear. So
yeah, that's very true. What else did you notice? Let's think about that second question. What barriers did he identify that might interfere with comprehension or getting to the central idea? I'd love to hear from one of you.
He knew that they would probably struggle with that vocabulary, so he picked out the words that he knew would be a struggle, and then to explicitly teach those words.
Exactly. Vocabulary. What else did he annotate? There was one more thing that he annotated he thought students might struggle with.
The tone.
Yeah, the tone, right? Some of the knowledge about like what's happening in that poem, kind of how an author uses their artistic license to kind of switch tones throughout the poem. Absolutely. All right. So those are the same things I surfaced as well. He analyzed the whole poem, keeping that central idea in mind. He thought about knowledge of that topic, the tone there, and some of the background knowledge they would need, as well as vocabulary, which is what Diane just shared with us. All right. So now he's on to saying, great, I analyzed my text. I know my students' kind of strengths and needs and comprehension. Now I have to figure out what to do about it. I've got to choose some strategies here. So we're now on to step 2. All right, I'm going to put you into breakout groups. And I'm going to ask you to review Mr. Yardley's plan to implement these scaffolds. And when you're in those groups, I'd like you to think about this. How is he utilizing his data to plan aligned supports? In a moment, I'm going to put you into breakout groups. I'm also going to ask some of us, the note catcher isn't quite working. So when you're in those groups, if you have someone that the note catcher is not working for, just share your screen so they can read it. And so you are going to, these are the 2 focus, this is the focus question, the slide I just shared with what you're about to do. And you're going to read Mr. Yardley's plan. It's a little bit long. And then you're going to think about this question. How did he utilize that data to determine supports? All right. Molly, why don't you stay here and I can see if I can actually get you a functioning note catcher, and then I'll put you back in a group once we can do that. Sound okay? Cool. All right. I think I'm going to keep the groups fairly large because some videos are off and I don't know who's actually able to kind of tune in. So we'll keep them in groups of 5. Those breakout groups are opening right now. Molly, stay here and then I'll send you in when we've gotten this problem fixed. So I'll see you in about 6 minutes. Welcome back. So you got the opportunity to read about Mr. Yardley's plan here. So let's discuss this question. How did he plan aligned supports and how did he utilize that data? What surfaced in your breakout groups? Feel free to use the chat or unmute and share.
Well, from his narrative activity, he had a pretty good thumb on, he broke them into groups, the groups 1 through 5, and he had a pretty good thumb on what was needed in each group. And so then he took that lesson and then determined from there. For instance, like group 5, he had them, he noticed that they just had a lack of fluency, but he also realized that, you know, they needed more than just the fluency. And that there may be some possible underlying issues. But for instance, like group 2, he knew that they needed some additional direct vocabulary instruction on those tier 2 words that were in the text. But then after thinking, he realized that that direct instruction or the explicit instruction of vocabulary would benefit all. Group 3, you know, he needed to do additional text dependent questions to ask while they were reading that text because they needed support in identifying text evidence. It looked like he had a pretty good finger on what differentiation he needed to do for each group.
Yeah, thank you so much, Diane. What else came up? Go ahead, Kirk. I think you were about to speak. Were you?
We would agree. He really did clue into his data or the subgroups, and then he had next steps for each of them, very specific to try out. He really was working hard at differentiating.
Yeah. In my last group, somebody compared it to, I wrote it down, juggling spinning plates. So he's really thinking about all these groups and he has got everything up in the air, right? This is a vision of excellence. We would love to see what this actually looks like in action, but this is the type of planning that really goes into supporting lots of students with very different needs. And so the things that you just identified here, everyone would benefit from that vocab support, as Diane told us, that direct vocabulary instruction. And then he thought about each of these additional groups and what they would need to feel supported. This is a hard thing to do. So today we're really going to think about this support that everyone needs as our starting point. How can we start bringing differentiation to life here in the classroom? What's our in? And to do that, we're going to think about this bucket of knowledge and vocabulary, in particular, activating and building knowledge and then supporting that vocabulary development. So why is knowledge so important? Jessica, would you mind reading this quotation for us, please?
Let me get off on mute. Knowledge seems to facilitate understanding, not only because it provides a base of information to support comprehension, but also because it influences how readers interact with text. For example, higher knowledge readers seem to spend more time making sense of ambiguous text, slowing down and persisting through difficulties, which helps them understand and remember what they read.
Thank you so much, Jessica. So this tells us that we tend to remember the things that we know. And so if we have a wide knowledge base, we will read something and be like, oh, that doesn't align with my schema. That doesn't align with what I know. Let me go ahead and reread that. But for folks who don't have a wide knowledge base about that particular topic, they might read right through it, not even stop to question it. So knowledge is not only important because we need it, but also because it changes how we interact with the text. It can be a motivational factor, and it can help us say like, wait, that doesn't align with what I know. Or, ooh, I didn't know that about this topic. I'm going to stop and slow down and check, kind of monitor my understanding. So that's why we're focusing on knowledge today. So I'm going to share a one-pager with you that you can share with your teachers. That's a kind of a one-stop shop for how to think about these three comprehension components. So I'm going to give you just a moment here to open up that differentiation supports for students documents. This is in your note catcher as a hyperlink, but I'll also just go ahead and put it in the chat as well. So take 30 seconds or so, know that this is there for you beyond right now, and look at this document. Just start to think about how you might want teachers to use it, how you would share this, what's value about it, what's not. It's just kind of navigate orient yourself to how this works. And if you are looking at my screen, I'll just go ahead and scroll down to the second page here. We'll just have about 20 seconds to review this. Madison, I resent that note catcher to .org, by the way.
Thank you. I'm a little tired. I was
No
right
problem.
the first time. I got
Okay.
it though.
The org popped up, so I'm like, I've emailed this one before, but not the .com.
Yeah. I was too embarrassed to correct myself for the third time. So
I
thank
figured
you.
that. Don't worry. All right. So as we look at this particular one-pager here, it just helps us think about, well, what data do I use to help identify where to start? How do I start with fluency? Do I start with vocabulary knowledge? Do I start with motivation? And then it gives some instructional supports. Again, we're going to focus today on knowledge and vocab, and then we'll turn our attention to fluency and decoding next time, and then just other thoughts. So you can iterate this. You can add different strategies you use in schools. You can change the data points if they seem to better align with data you're already using, but this just should help us know which comprehension culprit it is and where to start our scaffolding. All right. So now we're going to kind of lean into the knowledge vocabulary bucket, and I'm going to share a couple of strategies with you that you can then go on to share with your teachers and they can share with their students. So as we think about knowledge, there's kind of two big buckets we want to think about them in. One is activating knowledge and the other is building knowledge. So first, let's think about what it means to activate a student's knowledge. So students all have knowledge. All right, it might not be the same kind of knowledge we often prioritize in school, but they all come to us with knowledge, and that's really important to remember. The hard part about that is we have to ensure that they are bringing that relevant prior knowledge to the table, and they're using it to comprehend the text. So research tells us that, again, all students have knowledge, they're all coming to us with knowledge, but what's really tricky is that they don't often use it to make meaning. So it's our job to support them with, hey, this relates to the knowledge you already have. That's going to help you understand this text or build a schema around this. So this looks like us thinking really intentionally about providing meaningful opportunities to activate what they already know and then build upon that foundation. And this is different. This is this assets-based approach, because we're not saying this kid doesn't know about this. We're saying, what do you know that helps you understand this topic? And how can we continue to build your understanding? So that brings us to our second bucket, building knowledge. So as we think about building knowledge, it's more than just being really super book smart and knowing about, reading about fish and then reading about our planet's climate and then reading all of these nonfiction texts. That's one kind of knowledge, but the kind of knowledge we're talking about that really supports students in understanding the text and deepening their reading comprehension is a wide knowledge base on a particular topic. So as teachers, as coaches, we want to intentionally build students' knowledge by engaging them with a wide foundation and knowing a lot about a topic so that they can continue to build their schema as they read. One type of way we can build knowledge is through vocabulary support. So we're going to focus the remainder of our session here in thinking about vocabulary. And as we support vocabulary, there's kind of two main approaches that we can take. And this might be slightly different than what you're currently doing. There's direct vocabulary support, and then there's indirect vocabulary support. So let's talk about each of these separately. We're going to start here with indirect in just a moment. I'd love a volunteer. Actually, I'm just going to call on you for the sake of engagement here. Anna, would you mind reading about what direct vocabulary instruction is for us?
Direct vocabulary instruction, the teacher provides explicit instruction of and practice with vocabulary words in context before, during, and after reading, as well as engages students in word study, analyzing root words and affixes, etc.
Thank you so much. And Kirk, would you mind reading about indirect vocabulary instruction for us?
Certainly indirect, students learn vocabulary indirectly when they hear and see words used in many different contexts. Conversation, thematic text sets, read aloud experiences, and independent reading are essential.
Thank you so much. And so how many of you have talked about explicit or direct vocabulary instruction in your schools before? I'm expecting everyone, to raise their hand. Yeah, of course, we talk about this all the time. And one of the things I have seen folks do a lot, particularly ELA and special educators, is we put all the words in front of students. We're like, in this unit, you have to learn this and this and this and this and this. We front load vocabulary quite a bit. And we're actually making a shift here. When we think about strong direct instruction, that actually needs to be contextualized. And we're going to teach words within the context instead of, here's all the words you need to know, I'm going to teach them all to you, because that's actually impossible. When we think about indirect vocabulary instruction, that is actually the way we can get our students more knowledge, more words. Students have to learn something like 40,000, it might be 10,000, but between 10 and 40,000 words a year to be able to get to college ready to go reading those complex texts. And that is a big ask. So when we think about indirect vocabulary instruction, volume of reading plays a really big part here. If we're doing a thematic text set with students and we're asking them to read texts on the same topic, that builds their vocabulary much, much, much faster. So a lot of our vocabulary instruction should actually be kind of hands-off, indirect, but planned really intentionally so that we are offering rich read alouds to students, so that we are offering texts that are on that same topic to build knowledge, and that students are actually able to independently read quite a bit. So this takes the load off teachers a little bit, because then we don't have to teach every other word. We're setting the context for students to gain that knowledge indirectly. So as you think about vocabulary, there are two sides of this puzzle. There's the direct explicit instruction, which we often prioritize. And then there's indirect, and that's actually where students are going to read and learn most of their words. So as we think about Mr. Yardley, how does he support this knowledge through indirect vocabulary instruction? Any ideas how he's doing that? I'll put this slide up just for a moment so you can think about the different aspects that go into indirect vocabulary instruction. What's Mr. Yardley doing that's in line with this particular box?
he's using various texts. Last time they learned about Syria and the impact of the war, and then this time he was using the poem written by the 19-year-old. And so they are getting multiple representations of those words.
You got it, Diane. Absolutely. That's what I had as well. So we had this article, we have this map that he asked students kind of find the timeline of events on this map, and then he's using this poem. So just by providing a thematic text set, students can build knowledge this way. And this is really important actually for two different reasons. The first is what we'd probably all guess right away, repetition. So by reading a lot of texts on the Syrian war, you are likely to encounter the same words over and over again, like refugee, right? And just by seeing that word 15, 100, 400 times, you're going to acquire the knowledge about what refugee means. But the other part is a little bit more nuanced. And that is that when you're reading and have a wide foundation, a wide knowledge base, students can actually pick up and lift the meaning of the vocabulary word without multiple exposures. And that is because if they're already reading about a topic they already know, and they see a word that is new to them, they can use the context around it to gain the definition of that word. So again, in this way, it kind of acts like mental Velcro. If you're reading about a topic you know really well, you can acquire the meaning of a word much more quickly than if you're reading that word in a text or a topic you're unfamiliar with. Does that concept make sense? Okay. All right. So we thought a little bit about how he's supporting indirect vocabulary instruction. So let's turn our attention now to direct vocabulary instruction. All right. So what does this look like? Well, there's words that we need to spend less time on that students can acquire pretty quickly. And then there's words that we need to devote more time, attention, and energy on. So what I'd love for you to do is you're going to read a little excerpt from Meredith and David Lieben called "Which Words Do I Teach and How?" And I want you to think which words merit less time, excuse me, and which words merit more time. I'm going to go ahead and pull this up on my screen. You'll see this on page 7, but I'm also just going to leave it right here if that's easier for you. And again, you're thinking about which words merit more time and attention to teach and which merit less. About 4 minutes to read this article and think about those questions. Does anyone need more time to read? Okay, so I'd love in the chat for us to answer this first question. Which words merit less time? Go ahead and answer in the chat. You're also welcome to unmute and share. Which words merit less time? Thanks for kicking us off, Reed. Yep. Don't get in the way of the reading or that central idea. Absolutely. What else? Yeah, concrete words, single meaning. Yeah. And there's one more there. Let me find that last one. Yeah, they're part of a student's experience. This is a known word. Even if it's maybe not a known word to us, it's a word that maybe our students use, part of their culture, it's part of their lingo. What about the second part? Which words merit more time that we need to spend our time and attention on? Yeah, abstract words, multiple meaning words. Absolutely. All right. So to summarize here, you've got these two buckets. I'm just going to make my screen a little smaller so there's less kind of space on either side. We've got our two buckets here, the words that merit less time and attention, and the words that merit more time and attention. And a past practice really has been, let's teach them all because they're all important, but we don't need to do that. So we're going to continue to think and play around with what this looks like in instruction. So if we have a word, actually, I'm going to pause here. We have to be really, really careful about the words that we teach. We often have so many different options, and to kind of narrow down the words that we're explicitly and directly teaching, we have to think about why they're central to the text. I'm going to come back to Jessica's example earlier. In a math problem, it's linear. You want to teach what's going to get in the way of a student's understanding of that text. There is a tool I'm going to share with you. It's called the Academic Word Finder. So if teachers are teaching a passage, they can copy and paste their text into this, and then it will spit out the words that it thinks it might teach that are worthy of a little bit more time. So that's something that's in your note catcher. All right. So what I'd love you to do is try your hand at this. So in breakout groups, I'm going to ask you to discuss what is a word that merits more time and attention. What is a word that merits less? So you will see this under which words do I teach? This is on page 9. A word that merits less time, one that merits more. And then here is the poem again, if you need it. So you'll have about 4 minutes or so to discuss. I also encourage you to say like, no, I wouldn't teach that. And here's why. So like debate about these words. You don't have to be, it would depend on your group, your students, but you might have differing opinions. And I encourage you to embrace those and kind of duke it out, if you will. All right, I'm going to open up those rooms now, and you'll be here for about 5 minutes. There you go. All right. Welcome back, folks. All right, so I was able to talk to each of you individually in your room, so I don't think we have to spend a lot of time surfacing this together. What I heard from your groups is that some of these words would require a little bit more time and attention. Madison told me that her group identified persecuted as one that would take more time and attention. Refugee, that word. But then there were some of these other words that might not dictate a lot of our time. And you had mentioned pergola, and I don't know how to say it, so I'm going to say pergola for today, and then I might say pergola tomorrow. I'm not sure. And then we thought about pomegranate, because you could just show an image with that. And I agree with all of those choices. And I'm pausing here just because I'm resharing my screen. All right, so let's think about, what does this look like instruction? What would we want to see teachers do with these particular words once they've identified them? And identifying them usually is actually the hardest time. So we're going to kind of jump into the student's experience briefly, and then I'll come out of teaching mode so that we can kind of debrief this before we close out for the day. So the example I chose here was pergola. And so in this example, a quick explanation would do, you would read it in context. And then when you got to this particular line, from the grapes hanging from the pergola, a pergola is an archway in a garden or a park that's made from wooden posts that plants grow on top of, or you could just flash an image and then you're done with it, right? But we've got these other words that need more time and attention. So what we're going to do with this vocabulary protocol is we'll spend the first 2 or 3 minutes kind of in student mode, and I'm going to go into teacher mode, and then I'm going to step out of it for the sake of time to think about what we would do and kind of narrate that from a teaching perspective. All right, class, we are going to focus on this word persecute. So what I'd love for us to do is listen as I read this stanza from the poem, and I want you to think about the text evidence that supports our understanding of this word. From the dark black nights and sound of hungry dogs, I am from the morning when my dad asked a man who's ready to shut down his shop and leave the country, do you have kubus? Bread, even if it is old, believing that one day the sun will rise up again and light this persecuted city, Damascus. I am from the beautiful neighborhood and the nice people, from my grandma's house and pomegranate trees. I am from the smell of summer, rain, and fresh air, birds singing and the wind dancing in the trees. All right, so what text evidence can you find that might help us understand the word persecuted? Feel free to share in the chat or unmute and share. And this gives you an idea too. I'm sort of stepping out of like teacher mode for a second, but how hard this is when students do it too. And so for the sake of being students in this activity, it's like, ooh, which words do help me understand persecuted? So that student experience part is pretty important here. What do you think? What did you find that helps you understand this word persecuted? Thank you, Diane, for kicking us off. Dark black nights and sounds of hungry dogs. Diane, how do you think that's going to help you understand this term? Or what insight does it give you?
That it doesn't feel good to be persecuted, that it's sort of a dark thing.
Thank you. Anything else that you're finding that might be text evidence? Thank you, Madison. One day the sun will rise again. So the city is currently not lit up or in a positive light. Yeah. Anything else here? Even if it is old. Anna, why is that important?
I was thinking about like the desperation that comes from when you're persecuted, the feelings that you have, and you're willing to take whatever you can get.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Jessica, the man who's ready to shut down his shop and leave, not just leave for the day. Yeah, absolutely. So we also have some of these images that will help us understand this term persecuted. We've got this man walking with kind of these angry men holding bats around him, the upside, downside, and then this piece of text. Miss Gates said, when you get to high school, Cecil, you'll learn that the Jews have been persecuted since the beginning of history, even driven out of their own country. So I'm going to step out of teacher mode here for the sake of time. So we would share this, we'd have a similar discussion, help students use the images, different components of the images and the text to kind of refine their understanding of persecuted. And then we'd land on a shared definition here. Persecuted means to cause to suffer because of belief. And we'd spend some time on this slide too, kind of defining it and talking about it before we move to making connections. Then I would ask students to go ahead and use visuals or drawings or words to convey a meaning of that word persecuted. And then I would ask them to think of some synonyms. So they get them to kind of build on what schema they already have about this word. What are words that align with this darkness of persecuted? Which words do not? And I would share my own. And finally, we'd engage in some robust discussion here. Who's being persecuted in this poem? And then thinking about now in the United States, who's being persecuted here right now? Because it's not just something that happens all the way over there in Syria. It's something that we're living and breathing with right now. And I think for older students too, having this understanding of where this, how this is taking effect in their home is also really, really important. All right, so that is a 5-step kind of vocabulary protocol that if the text demands it, we would go through with students. This is from the Louisiana Guidebooks curriculum. So I want you to take a moment. I'll put it on my screen again. And we're going to close out shortly, by the way. We're going to look at this and I'm going to share little slides about your role in supporting teachers with all of this. And we're going to close out. But this is the Louisiana Guidebooks guidance for teaching, explicitly teaching vocabulary. So just take a moment and read through. And know that this protocol is flexible. You can adapt it across disciplines. You can think about different activities for students to do in each of these buckets, but this helps students to kind of be presented with a word and then refine their definition and the meaning of that word. So at the end, they can actually apply it and have a very deep understanding of the word. I'll give you about 30 seconds just to read through this. Dan, I'm getting a little feedback, I think, so I'm just going to go ahead and mute you. There you go. Does anyone need more time to go through this protocol? Okay. All right. And so as we think about this too, it is meant to be flexible and adapted to your group of students, your content, your age group, etc. All right. Today, we really thought about that students don't have it's not that they do understand the content or they don't. There's this like nuanced level of comprehension, and we really need to think about what are they understanding and where are their strengths in comprehension and where are their needs. So as we think about our supports for our student, teachers must carefully analyze the text and think about those barriers that students will face, as well as be responsive to those student needs. So as you're supporting your own teachers with this, make sure that they're kind of closing the loop here, assessing the student progress, and then adjusting as needed. And here are just some key things to think about if you're a leader or if you're a teacher. So if you're a leader and the coach, you can support students to intentionally develop their students' language and vocabulary by helping them plan read-alouds. Yes, even for older students, helping them think about text sets, determining which vocabulary words are important, thinking about how and when to use that vocabulary protocol, and then ensuring students do have access to a large volume of books that are on that topic. And then if you're a teacher, it's your job to actually support students on the ground by activating and building knowledge, by reading the text in the unit and thinking about what makes them complex, determining those vocabulary needs and planning to support them, and thinking about where and how to incorporate the read alouds, the discussions, and independent reading. So again, we're talking about the linguistic comprehension side of the equation, which really does support reading comprehension, and we'll revisit decoding the next time we come together. I'm leaving you with a couple of resources, but I'll also email you the follow-up email with a PDF of today's presentation, the note catcher, and some other things. You have your differentiation one-pager and that 5-step protocol. All right, before we close out today, I'd love to hear from you. What's something that's top of mind to you for you? And then I'm going to go ahead and chat you the feedback link. Thanks so much, Dan, for kicking us out. Yeah, that aspect of indirect vocabulary is so tricky, but it's so important. We cannot teach all the words. Yeah, the difference of how to support vocabulary instruction in context and when to front load, when and if to front load. Yes, equations for everyone, math and ELA alike. Awesome. And so I hope that gives you an additional layer of things to think about. Reminder that we're going to come back April 21st for decoding and fluency. And thank you so much for being here today. I will see you in a month. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. Bye.
Thanks, Allie.
Yeah.